The wind atop the wall could find every seam in a man's furs and slip a blade of cold into it. Jon Snow had learned that when he was a boy, too young to be more than the shadow of his sword and the echo of his father's name. Years later, he still stood and let the wind cut him, as though taking its measure would close the distance between himself and the judgments he had to give. Below, the world ran white and blue to a horizon winter kept retreating. The forest's crowns were black brushes sunk in drifts. Beyond the trees, the campfires of the free folk gave their own dim constellation. Tents huddled together as if that could trick the cold out of its nature. Jon could make out the red sparks of a forge and the smoke from cook-fires that did not carry the smell of meat, because there was no meat to spare. "Giant's Bane is at the gate," said Ed from the stairs, his breath a pale pennon in the air. "He's come without a spear in his hand and a few more behind him who haven't seen a comb since the first snow. If he asks for the same as yesterday, I can cry for mercy without you." "You won't," Jon said. The hinges groaned open to let Tormund Giantsbane step inside the narrow throat between the inner and outer gates. The portcullis hung over them, black with ice, like a sword poised to fall. Tormund had wrapped himself in a bear's skin, and the bear had lost the argument. His beard was white with frost except where it was red from his own drink. "Snow," Tormund rumbled without preamble. His voice could have served as a drum. "I've men and women out there with no meat and no wood thick enough to burn twice. I've children waking with their hair frozen to the hides. I've old ones who don't wake at all. Let us through." Behind Tormund, a few free folk waited in the gully of the gate with hollow cheeks and eyes like coals gone gray. Jon knew that if he looked beyond them at the camp, he would find men with eyes that looked no different. He had prepared all the words. The practice of saying them took the meaning from them and left weight. "Tormund," he said, "you know why I cannot." "Because you're a crow who's forgotten he's a man," Tormund said. "Because the men in your black hoods chirp and say law as if that closes a belly. Because the oath is the only thing that keeps the black from turning on itself," Jon answered, and he heard the bones in his words like a man hears the bones in stew. "We took no wives. We father no children. We hold no lands. We take no part in the wars of the realm. We guard the realms of men. To do that, the watch must be the watch. We're men," Tormund said softly, so the narrow throat of stone caught the sound and kept it. "We're the realms you guard." He leaned forward until Jon tasted the sour of his ale. "And the dead are the wars that have come to you whether you ask for them or no. Letting so many pass the wall at once will break us," Jon said. He wished his voice did not sound like he was begging himself. "We do not have grain for 10,000. The free folk do not kneel to law. There will be blood. The watch is too thin as it is, and if my brothers think I have turned my cloak for you, they will turn on me and then on each other, and then the wall will belong to no one." Tormund laughed, a rough sound with no happy in it. "Aye, marsh and the soft bellies will weep and say you betrayed the old words carved in ice. But words don't keep the wind off a child, Snow. Words don't send the dead back under the snow." Jon looked up. He could not help it. The wall's blue mass reared over them, and from here you could feel the mountain of it, how it bent the light into a kinder color than the day deserved. "I will send wood," he said, "barrels of salt beef. I will have Cotterpike send boats to the east along the coast to take those who wish to sail for Eastwatch, to be kept there, away from our keeps. The children and the very old, we can take those. But not your warriors, not your raiders. Not all. And how many of mine do you think the dead will leave us with before your boats nose the ice?" Tormund asked. "You count suckling babes as if the cold doesn't eat babes first. You promise boats as if ice keeps its edges where you left them. You'd have me cut my own people into pieces, Snow, and toss the offal across your wall to make friends of men who've never eaten a belly less soft than their cheeks." Jon felt ghost at his side, the big direwolf so quiet he was a piece of the cold. A white mask and red eyes. He had dreamed once of red eyes over a field of coal and snow. He had not told anyone what the eyes had been set into. "You have become my friend," Jon said, and knew those words were less sufficient than a spark on a lake. "As much as men in our places can be. I cannot give you what you ask." Tormund stared at him long enough for a breath to be a measure. His face did a thing Jon did not like, a slow resignation that looked like a man laying down a sword he did not think he would ever lift again. "Then the dead will be your friend," Tormund said, "for they will have more to say to you than I ever will." He turned without another word. Jon stood in the falling silence after Tormund left, and listened to the gate grunt closed. Bowen Marsh was waiting inside the yard, his cheeks raw from wind and proud temper. Othel Yarwick stood with him, cuffing his hands together for warmth as if he could squeeze blood out of his own fingers to warm them. Behind them, the Queen's men in bright orange and yellow flapped like summer birds that had lost their season. The wildling woman Val watched from a porch, her hair a pale fall against furs too fine for any of the men below. There were eyes on Jon from everywhere, and it made the yard feel like a narrowing throat. "You did what you must," Marsh said, and the relief in him was a kind of indecency. "We are the Night's Watch. We keep them out, not take them in." "We keep the realm," Jon said. He did not look at Marsh when he said it. He was looking at Melisandre. The Red Woman stood apart, her cloak bright as a wound against the drab of men who spent winter as a habit. She was watching him, but she sometimes watched the space beside a man as if someone stood there who was as real as the man with blood in his cheeks. "Has the king sent word?" "His Grace has ridden south," said one of Queen Celis' knights, with a southern voice grown brittle in the cold, "to pluck a pretender from his stolen seat. He cannot tarry with beggars on the wrong side of his kingdom's long fence." "Then he will not be vexed," Marsh said, overeager. "We have held to our oath." "Have we?" Melisandre's voice could have been a glove. It made the men nearest her fidget. "A fire burns brightest, my lord, when the wood is dry. The people beyond your wall are wet wood. Cold clings to them. Throw them into your hearth and you may make smoke that chokes you." "What do you see in your flames today, my lady?" Jon asked. The question tasted foolish. It never had before. "Rivers," she said. "Blue rivers that run without water. Frozen rivers that carry feet as swift as boats carry oars. And a forest moving as if each tree chose to step forward. The shadows are long, Lord Snow. They do not belong to midday." Bowen Marsh made the sign of the mother, a reflex that he hid by tugging his glove. "Your red god speaks like a mountebank in a fair." Jon looked up at the wall again. How many times could a man look before it would tell him what he needed to know? "Send word to Eastwatch," he told Ed. "Gather driftwood. Prepare for boats and for men without boats. We will send Fletchers to work, more arrows. We will send barrels as promised." "You cling to boats like a man clings to the last handhold on a cliff," Melisandre said. "In the flames I see ice serving as boats." "Then at least the river you spoke of will not drown anyone," Jon said. He did not like how her mouth curved, neither smile nor smirk. The days gathered into themselves like snow clumping into a cornice with the wind's help. Jon slept less, or slept in the wrong hours, and woke inside of dreams he did not like. He dreamed of his father, of a gray wind going ahead of him through a night that felt like an empty room where someone was breathing. He dreamed of his sword burning his hand and the fire not giving light. He dreamed of the sea freezing and men walking where no boat ought to go. Letters arrived shriveled as if the ravens had carried them in their bellies. Cotter Pike wrote like a man trying to throttle someone with a quill. Ice was forming along the shore. Storms were coming out of nowhere, and the wind had changed to a smell the Eastwatch men did not have a name for. Men on the wall saw things between waves, the way fishermen told jokes about mermaids in summer, except none of the men laughed when they told it. The first night the horns sounded twice for rangers returning. Jon went to the yard with his hair still wet from a hurried comb. There were 6 men where there should have been 10. The 6 moved with the broken logic of those who had run too long in the cold and then warmed too quickly. When the gates closed, one man fell to his knees and vomited something that was more blood than water. "Hard home," the ranger with the scar down his lip said thickly. "We saw light in the cove like smiths workin', a whole city's worth of irons. The dead walk there. They don't hide in the woods." They come out of the water and out of the old houses. We saw them climb where a man with breath would have slipped. Were there children? John asked. The words tore him. Women. Some, the ranger said. Not enough. We turned back before we were turned ourselves. There was a woman with a babe who had no voice left to cry, and she didn't look at the babe when it stopped breathing. Hard home is wrong. There's a wrong in it that makes you think your own bones are in the wrong place. Bow and Marsh made sounds about strengthening their own ramparts and sealing the posterns and sealing the talk, too, before it ran like rumors do. The rumor outran him because rumor would pass through a keyhole if someone left it. In the hall, men ate with eyes turned inward. A laugh sounded once and died on its own air. John ate little and found it hard to swallow what he did. Ghost paced the hall's perimeter like the white edge of a dream. Val found him outside after. You think you have made a clever compromise, she said. Her mouth did not soften for him. She had the cool pride of a woman who had not been taught to lower her eyes for men whose houses had names. Hand out your charity in neat rations and keep us beyond your spell. You would sort my people into parts like a butcher sorts a beast. I would keep my brothers from splitting one another's heads while the dead are not even at the gate yet, he said. They are at the gate, she said. You just do not wish to open your eyes while you stand under it. She looked at the wall, as men who did not grow up with it always did, like it was a thing out of storybooks. You have your pride. Smells like you. When it does not keep your lovers warm at night, you will be rid of it. I have no lovers, he said, and the old hurt came into his voice unbidden. He clamped his jaw over it. If I had 100, I could keep them no more warm than this wall could. She made a small sound and went away, leaving the mark of her words. When Tormund came again, he was 3 stone lighter and his bones sat different under his skin. He had given men to the dead and given men to hunger and given men to his own sword when they would have eaten those who went weaker first. He had never been a man shaped for kneeling, but he kneels in other ways. Boats? He asked. Some, John said. The sea does not love us. We do what we can. What you can is too little, Tormund said, and there was no heat left. Listen, Snow. There's a white storm in the east that follows you if you run and faces you if you face it. The dead do not come with it. They are under it, walking with it as a man's shadow walks with him. I'll say it plain because I can't be bothered to go around it anymore. If you cannot open this wall for mine, then for the sake of whatever gods you love, open the wretched little doors at Eastwatch and let those who can run on hard feet run south along the shore. We will take the boats that can carry children. The rest of us will run till we fall, or we will run better. Keep your oath and your cold and your marshman smiling in your hall. But don't keep the babes. Don't keep the babes to give to the dead. John said yes to that. He did not look at Bowen Marsh first. When you throw bread to a pack of dogs, Bowen said afterward, trembling under his protest. The dogs bite one another before they think to bite your hand. You are making a mad scramble at our door, Lord Commander. You are making murder without raising a sword to do it. I am trying to choose which murder I must stand before in the end, John said. If the dead want soldiers, I will not give them children. He slept little. When he did, he saw a shore packed so full of people that the sea itself could not push between them. And he saw a white tide moving over the sand that knocked men to their knees and then did not wash away. At Eastwatch, Cotter Pike wrote again, and his letters made even less sense because he had begun to write while the messengers stood, as if each word was a stone to throw at the messenger's face. The sea was freezing in sheets. Patches of black water moved between panes of ice like eyes between shutters. Free folk came to the gates in 2s and 10s and 100s, carrying children that were mostly bone and cloth. Men taller than Cotter himself spoke quietly and did not look at him when they looked at him. He did not become kinder. He became better at counting how many would fit on a boat that would not capsize. His men cursed until their curses were prayers. You wanted boats, John told Melisandre in the yard. We have boats, and the sea wants to be land. The sea wants to be what the cold tells it to be, she said. A man is better than the sea, if the man's fire is pure. Do not be a boatman, Lord Snow. Be a fire. Be a fire and burn what? Everything that is not fire. Her smile was not a comfort. Do not mistake me. I would have your refuse pile for my altar if it would buy us a warmer night. But I have looked into the flames so long I see the world only as kindling or ash. And I will tell you this, when the east wind turns, the ash blows that way first. What do you want of me? You know already, she said. I am only the woman who refuses to let your eyes close when you try to sleep. There are days that move like a ship coming into harbor, slow and inevitable. There are days that fall like the barrel of a cart rolling off its edge into a ditch, without ceremony or warning. The day Eastwatch sounded 3 blasts was one of the latter. John did not even recall if the wind had shifted in some recognizable way beforehand, because the horns ate the memory of their own moment into your head while they rang. They came not as a wave, not at first. They came as a line of darkness where darkness should not be, moving across the ice as if someone had spilled ink into the sea and the ink had decided to grow legs. The ice did not creak under their weight like it ought. They flowed. Men say that things flow when they move together with purpose. The dead moved that way not because they had made a plan, but because they were the plan. Cotter Pike held Eastwatch as if he had been born at its gate. Men who had expected never to forgive him followed him as if he were a rope. They set fire to the ice where sludge and snow would catch it. The fire ran and then was smothered, and the men coughed smoke and thought they were winning because coughs and winning are cousins in a fight. The first to fall was a man with a wife beyond the Honeywine who waited for him as if he were late for dinner. The last to fall before the night truly ate the day was a boy who had told a friend that he would be brave if given a chance. Many fell between. The free folk huddled near and far and watched the dead find the gaps in their fear. Here and there a small figure darted away, slipping through the smoke and frost, and the men of Eastwatch found hands for them when they could. John did not ride to Eastwatch because he could not be in 2 places at once and there were more horns elsewhere. The dead do not knock first where men expect. A flurry of ravens came like a blacker snow and then died in drifts on the yard stones, and men swept them up with shovels and holy shock. When 3 blasts sounded from the east, 1 sounded from the west soon after. Shadows walked in the Shadow Tower's woods. Dennis Mallister sent only 1 letter because the second would have been a pair of words. He said he would stand. John had expected no other letter from that man at the last and was pained that he had been right. In the dark that followed, John watched the wall. He had always thought it didn't move. It moved now in the wind day, and the gray light. It didn't move enough to be called moving, but it didn't seem the same wall it had been yesterday. He thought of men writing their names on castle stones so the castle would belong to them for as long as their names lasted. He had no knife to carve with and nothing to carve into that wooden melt. Ghost pressed his head against John's thigh and breathed a long breath. It warmed him no more than a thought would. Tormund came out of the dark at dawn as if the dawn had made him, stumbling and carrying a boy over his shoulders with the tenderness of a bear who has decided it will be one. The boy did not cry. He whimpered with a sound that might have been a lullaby if you pressed your ear to a wall and listened through rooms. With him came others in a compress of bodies and breath, an ugly flock of living things. They stopped when they saw the gates and were grateful for stopping. "What do you want me to do?" John asked him. He had to ask because asking it was a way to say different words. "Open," Tormund said. "I will hold it. If the dead come before you can shut it again. We'll rattle their bones together so they make a worse music than yours in the hall." Bowen Marsh said something like a curse and something like a prayer and put his hand on his dagger not to draw it but to give it company. The Queen's men spoke of his grace and his rights over the wall, and their voices sounded like children insisting that the sky was theirs. John did not bother to tell them which sky belonged to whom. He looked at the boy over Tormund's shoulders and at the woman behind him who was too dehydrated for tears, and at the old man who had lost the use of his whole left side and dragged it like a stubborn child. "Open," John said. They took only the children, the very old, women who held nothing heavier in their arms than bones. Between each gate opening the men slapped pitch onto the wood and took torches to it and watched for what would stick. The free folk went in like water poured from a cracked cask. Too fast at first and then only drops. The boy over Tormund's shoulders never cried. 3 times they opened, 3 times they closed. On the fourth that John thought would be the last because the pattern of his day had formed around it, the dead came. They did not come as many men expect. Not with a roar, not with a battle song borne backward from their throats. They came like a chill moving over skin, a shiver your body took before your mind had decided to be afraid. A mist rolled low against the ground, and there were shapes in it whose legs did not seem to find purchase with the right rhythm. Arrows flew, whistles and a wind in the fletchings, and some stuck, and that was a surprise because John had half expected the arrows to refuse to touch. Men lit pitch and threw, and things took flame that should not have taken flame, and things refused it that should have burned like oil. Tormund did not go backward. He went forward as if forward were a path he had spent his life building. He carried a long-hafted axe that had cut wood and men but never felt like it loved either task. He took the first dead thing that came into his range by the bones of its left arm and reduced it to pieces with his second. Men around him learned a dance in the time it takes to say a nursery rhyme. Step, swing, step, light, step, swing. In the high places along the wall, archers did what archers in a tale should do, and in the low places men did what men in a tale never do because the tale would have to admit they were afraid. John did not join the melee. He had learned the lesson of commanders. The first was not to die where your men could see you. The second was not to live so far from their dying that you stopped feeling it. He stood, he directed, he sent men where men were thin and recalled them when they were thinner. He had Ed with him and Yarwick, who took off a glove long enough to get fingers into the drill, and Marsh, whose mouth made a hard line meant to hold up the sky. Melisandre stood at the back and did nothing a man could name, but later men would say she had done everything. The dead things did not climb the wall. They threw themselves against the lower gate with the dull persistence of a man in love with a door. They were not constructs without cunning. A pair of small shapes darted into the hinge at the base and locked themselves there so the weight would carry differently when other shapes pushed. John had not thought to fear such a thing. He learned how to fear it while it happened. When it was over all at once. That is how battles go that are not for songs. The dead drew back, but withdraw is too noble a word for what they did. The mist simply thinned and the cold that had a direction lost it, and men who had been shouting found that they were whispering. The free folk who had not taken their chance to come through the gate while it gaped stood rooted because moving at that hour did not feel sensible to their legs. Tormund was breathing like a bellows that did not know it had finished its work. A boy who had become unboy overnight sat down with no plan to sit and discovered he could not stand again. "What did you see?" John asked Melisandre when they could talk without raising their voices. "The wind," she said. "The wind with a face to it. It turned toward us once and then did not like something about our smell and turned away. She looked tired enough to qualify as human for one breath. You should thank your dire wolf. It is not a hound. Hounds were made to know men and obey if taught. Wolves know only the laws of the forest, which are older than your wall and kinder. Ghost." John looked down. Ghost's fur was an opal where fires had been reflected in it. His muzzle looked like the edge of a butcher's board. "What did he do?" "He told the wind he would bite it," she said, as if talking about the weather. "The wind is not used to being told that." Bowen Marsh pressed his lips together then, his mouth making a complicated shape. "We cannot do this again," he said to John. "This taking in women and whelps while we fight a battle at our door. Next time they come we shut the gates and keep them shut until the dead are only stories told too late at table. Or we will be the story. We cannot afford to do otherwise," John said. He said it wearily and it was still the truth. Marsh turned away as if turning away could make a world where his words were right. The days afterward made a pattern to live by until the pattern broke again. They took in those they could every morning because morning was when the dead seemed to forget for a few hours what it was they wanted. They burned their dead in great bloodless pyres that stank of hair and boots. They sent food to those still beyond the wall, though the casks lessened and lessened. Eastwatch bled men and then stopped bleeding because it had nothing left to bleed. Cotter Pike sent a last letter that used only short words because long ones wasted the time of men who were reading beside a wall that was being climbed by ice. Dennis Mallister died with half a dozen men at his back and one in his arms like a son. the shadow tower melted into a name. That is all strong places are, names that someone remembers to say into the air often enough that the air respects them. When the name is not said, the air forgets it. John did not become a tyrant over his own brothers only because he had no energy to be new kinds of things. He became a man whose eyes were too old to be in a face so young. That is not rare among lords in winter. Ghosts stayed nearer than a man might believe a beast could stand to be and not become a shadow. Your stubbornness saved lives, Val told him one dusk, when the sky bled into blue in a way that had become the normal wound. And it killed more. Everything I have done lately has two names for it, he said. You think the tales to come will pick the kinder name? I do not expect to be in the tale, he said, and surprised himself with the relief in it. You will be in it, she said, because men like Bowen Marsh will breathe the story until the air remembers. You like Marsh less than I do, John said, not smiling. Imagine that. I do not like him less, she said. I do not like him in some way that is not bigger or smaller. He is the part of you, the one you have chosen to kiss, that says no to your better self. Is it a luxury to have a better self left? He asked. Yes, she said. You cannot afford it. Keep it anyway. Word came in the deep cold that Stannis was taken by the snow, that snows took men without a blade. There were other words. It did not matter. If the South burned each man's house down for sport, that would only make the long road for the dead smoother going. The pink letter came to Castle Black, and it was a child of malice and ignorance. It told John to come south with hostages who were not his and parts of men he did not have. It told him to come like a hound called. He laughed when he read it, and Marsh flinched to hear that sound from him because it was a sound that could cut you. Do you ride? Ed asked him later, and he said no because he would not leave the wall to go settle a lord's quarrel while ghosts asked to be let in with their small white teeth chattering. He did not speak of his sister. To not speak of your sister when your blood is an iron thing to do. But he kept his mouth shut over iron. Men stopped sleeping all night through. A man would doze and jump, as if sleep were a hole he fell into and a hand reached up from it each time. The free folk in the yard made their place by making it. A woman set up a little school out of a box because she could not bear to watch children sit in their own heads so much of the day. A man with only one eye made an oven out of a pile of old stones and taught his grandson to knead. An old woman sat and sang every day at the same hour a song that had no end. The queen's men had more fires and more gods. They made a spectacle of their god and then told each other that it was the spectacle that mattered. In the night, Melisandre walked the ramparts and did not speak to any man who did not ask her something worth answering. In the deep of late winter, the dead came again. They came westerly this time. The snow moved like cloth pulled by too many hands. The wind had a voice for real and said nothing in it. John had not planned to die that night, but he had learned that plans were only a way to make a mess more tidy when you had to walk through it. He put on his sword as if it made him a better man and climbed to the top of the wall and watched the white come. He remembered then that he had never taken an axe into a wood to fell a tree. A Stark son and a crow who had not cut his own fire if he did not have to. He had taken lives and he had not taken wood. It struck him as an imbalance he could not correct now. The world is full of those. At the bottom of the wall, in the blue-white dim, the dead arranged themselves in a way that no one had taught them and no one could have said was wrong. They were so many it made the ground look like the back of a something that had skin. He thought it beautiful, resentfully. He watched Tormund walk out ahead like a man who had a date with death and would not insult her by being late. John felt an itch in his hands for a sword. He had never believed a sword to be a cure until he needed one as you need the last of your breath. It struck him with the force of water in the lungs that if he had opened the wall, truly opened it, if he had taken the free folk in with their axes and their pride and their faulted ways, the dead mass below would have been smaller by thousands. He imagined 1,000 fewer and then many thousands fewer. He imagined fewer dead in the dead. He imagined the gate open and then the dead not as thick. He imagined an old woman with a song teaching a child to grind flour in the sun with her palm and the child later standing on the wall with a bow. He imagined and then he stopped because imagining too is a luxury. He came down the switchbacks fast enough to slip once and have Ghost put his weight behind him to steady him. By the time he reached the yard, men had begun to put their hands where they went without being told. The Queen's men planted their standards as if a bit of sewn cloth could teach the cold to respect color. "Open," Ed said, and did not add again because he did not need to. John could not count anymore how many he had allowed to pass. He had counted at first because counting is how men make sense of things. He did not count anymore. Instead, he thought of a scale. He had put nothing on the right side of it yet, and the left had more bones than any man knew who wanted a right side left in the world. "Open," he said. Bowen Marsh touched his arm. He did not grip. His voice was not sneering. "You will get us all killed," he said, and he meant killed by men later after they wheezed through this. "Our brothers will not forgive it. When the dead are not at our door, they will recall that you put wild woods inside our hall, and they will say you did not keep what had to be kept. If we are living to be soured at," John said. "We are living." Marsh's mouth trembled. He was not made to weep in front of men. He did not. He turned and did his duty like a man given a broom and a fire and told he could put one out with the other. Tormund met John's eye only once during that long night. There was an understanding in it that had never been between them when they had called each other names on warmer days. It was the understanding of two men who have watched a thing big enough to keep them both small. At dawn, the dead withdrew, and this time the withdrawal was a word you could use. They pulled back in a wave, as if something had caught their attention off to the south in a way that had meant more to them than the doorway full of smoke and rage in front of them. They left bodies where they had been broken. The bodies made shapes that men would step around the rest of their days, because stepping on them would make the world feel banished around your foot. Afterward, John stood inside the cold room he made of his own thoughts. He had done a thing that had no good in it and all the good in it. He had opened when he had said he would not. That is a kind of cowardice and a kind of courage. Melisandre came and did not speak for a long time because she knew how sometimes the silence is a ceremony in itself. "Say it," he said at last, roused to anger with no aim. "I do not know what words you want," she said. "The ones that tell me I did wrong," John said, tempted by the clean punishment of such words. "Or the ones that tell me I did right." "You kept breath in small chests," she said. "You made enemies who will later say their hate is faith. You gave the dead fewer feet. You gave the living a worse winter by making them share their wood. If you need me to bless you, I can. If you need me to curse you, I can. You are a man who turned a key. Keys do not know what doors will show you when they open." "What do you see in your flames now?" he asked. "A girl with a wolf and no name," she said. "And a man with a tired sword in a hall that will forgive nothing. I see a ship frozen in harbor that looks like a grave too proud to bury its own dead. I see a tower. I always see a tower. The top of it is broken and the sky looks through it. Surprised." She paused. "I see a boy, yellow hair, white fear. He would have died tonight if you had kept your word. He will grow to hate you, and he will also have sons who will never know they owe you anything." He laughed because if he did not, he would crumple. It was not a kind laugh. "That is the sort of worship I can expect," he said. "It is the only sort that is honest," she said. They went on. "You always do. Even in stories where men do not go on, they go on in the words you say about them." The yard filled with more people than had been designed for it. Men of the watch rubbed elbows with men who would have stolen their boots while they were still on their feet in warmer years. Knives sparked in corners like thoughts that should not be told later. Fights happened over stale bread and over the place closest to the wall that blocked a wind. They had a gallows for murderers and used it fewer times than a southerner would expect. They had other ways. A pair of men were set to sort rotten barrels side by side until one of them cried, and then they laughed, and then it did not matter why they had fought. A woman with a broken arm mended half the leather in the hall and cut her fingers and did not make a sound each time. She taught the girl with no mother how to sew a straight seam, and they saved 3 men's toes that way. Bowen Marsh never smiled. Not anymore. He did not conspire. The thoughts that might have led a man like him to draw knives in a dim corridor dried up in the cold. He saw John walk among men and he thought ill of it, and still he went where he was sent and did what he was told. because duty was the last blanket you had, and if you gave it away you shivered until you died. Sometimes he stood looking at the postern gate and scowled as if it had insulted him personally. It had. He had almost been born for that gate to stay shut. Tormund slept twice in a dozen hours, and then did not sleep for 3 days, and then fell asleep standing against a wall and slid down it like a child who had been pulled by the tide. He woke and ate, and told the story of a woman who had told a dead thing it was not as handsome as her man had been, and then had died in a way that made his eyes go damp. He told no more stories that day. He looked at Jon and shrugged once, a small movement that looked like the lowering of a standard when the wind has already died. In the end, the dead did end. Ot break them at the wall. Not then. They did not have their last battle there or know when they would have it. That is a gift the living cannot be given. The dead do not leave behind schedules. The dead do not need time. The living live in it and try to hang their weight from it like a hook. Spring did not come. The word remained in men's mouths, sucking heat out of the air around it by the end of it. The sun came sometimes and lay on the world like a hand that did not know whether to grip or pat. The first thaw left footprints deep enough to drown a small man in. The mud smelled like old sins. The gods, if there were gods, kept their counsel. Jon wrote letters. He wrote to lords who had not forgiven his half-name. He wrote to lords who had. He wrote to men who did not know which they were. He asked for grain and for men to man a wall that had been manned by ghosts too long. Some answers came. Some did not. Some answers were swords with words carved on them that pretended to be bread. He took what bread he could and chewed until his tongue went numb with the effort of pretending it tasted like food. The day something like peace came, it came in small ways. The oven's old stones finally cracked, and the one-eyed man and his grandson built it again with stones that would not be as good. The girl who had been taught to sew made a leather mitten that had 2 thumbs because she had not understood the pattern yet. She laughed and wore it anyway because in a pinch there are joys to spare. Ed said wry things in the yard and men who were dying laughed at him, grateful to be reminded they were still able to do it. Jon went to the highest place on the wall when the light was a flat piece of iron across the horizon. It was quiet in a way that could be mistaken for peace. The free folks' camp beyond had shrunk to pockets, fires that were no longer constellations, only stray sputters that did not remind the dark of stars. He looked at it a long time until tears leaked out without permission because he had not decided to cry. He let them freeze his lashes and did not wipe them because wiping was a decision he did not have to make. Ghost sat beside him with his tongue out just enough to look like a boy trying not to laugh. Below them, the world, which did not know them, waited. He thought then of the first time he'd ridden a shaggy little pony in the Winterfell yard, stuck between pride and fear, certain his father would notice both. He thought of a girl with red hair who had pretended not to know him for a week after he had scuffed her shoe on purpose. He thought of his uncle then, and of how the world eats the men. The boy with yellow hair whose life Melisandre had promised him in the flames was throwing snow with the other boys, and he did it badly and then a little better because another boy pressed his hands around his and showed him how to make the white ball hold together before you threw it. The boy glanced once at Jon and looked away as if ashamed of knowing him. That was all right. Jon did not need the boy to love him. Tormund stood near the gate, rolling his shoulder, listening to it complain. "Might have to get me a new shoulder," he said when Jon came near. "Left this one in a nest of down on the road from the frozen shore." "I will add it to the tally of requests," Jon said. "Put it under the name that says, 'Give me something that is not forgiving,'" Tormund said. He turned to look at Jon straight and his eyes were not friendly and not unfriendly. "You know, Snow, if you'd opened your precious ice thing when I first asked, we'd have had fewer bodies for the dead to play with." "I have thought that," Jon said, 1,000 times. "I know you have," Tormund said, gruff with mercy. "Thinking is the one thing you will never starve of. Did you also think that if you'd done it, you'd have been cut to bits by your own before the next night?" "Yes," Jon said. "Good," Tormund said, "because then you won't waste your breath asking your gods why they gave you only 2 hands. 2 was all they could spare. They are stingy bastards." They stood there together the way men stand when they do not know what to say without lying. The dead were not gone. They were not free of them. They would never be. A man is not free of his death because he runs faster for a few days. But the yard had life in it. The air had men's sounds in it. The weight that had settled over the wall sat lighter for an hour. "Tomorrow," John said, "we send men to the village with the tower that looks like a finger. There were smoke columns there today. If there are families, we take them. I don't care what Marsh says about rations. We did the accounts again. We can stretch if we pretend we have a better cook." "I'll pretend," Tormund said. "I was born to pretend. Ask my wives." "How many are you claiming now?" John asked because it was rude of him not to. "As many as I still remember," Tormund said. He was quiet for 3 heartbeats. "If the wind comes again, snow. If it comes hard, don't try to shame it into turning aside with just your look. Don't stand noble and expect it to thank you for your sticking to what men before you scratched on some stone. Throw your little doors wide and let all the things you hate about us pass inside your ring. You'll hate it, but you'll be warmer, and the dead won't be inside the circle with the living when they rise. I said my piece. Burn me if you like." "I don't like," John said. "I hear you." Tormund looked satisfied with the answer in the way of a man who knows he cannot be satisfied and pretends for the sake of a friend. "Good. I'd hate to haunt you." "I snore." "You would," John said. He watched the free folk at their small business. He watched his own at theirs. He watched the Queen's men decide daily that the world owed them an answer and the world give them none. He watched the girl in Val's borrowed furs teach 3 younger children the letters of a song she'd pieced together from 2 tunes. He watched Ghost watching him as if weighing him for a thing he would be asked to do later. He kept count, not with numbers, with images. Each small life he let in through his compromised gate had a face. That face rested in him with its own weight. He did not apologize to himself anymore. He did not spend an hour each night explaining to his oath the reasons it should forgive him. He did not seek old names for new things or new names for old sorrow. He put one foot in front of the other and fed who he could and kept who he kept and sharpened every blade that would accept a whetstone and looked at the horizon where the blue turned into a brightness that meant nothing. And every now and again, when night was oppressed that would not be argued with, when the wind moaned like a thing that had lost the use of its legs, when the guard on the southern wall had gotten used to watching the wrong direction, when the last torch was guttering in a niche and hoping for a hand, when that came, John was ready to be hated. He had trained for it. He had let himself be shaped for it, like a shoe shaped around a last into what it needed to be. He had refused, and then he had opened. In the story that will be told, men who love easy tales will say that he was wise and then he was weak, or that he was weak and then he was wise. Both are lies that flatter the tongue. He was a man at a wall. He chose and chose again. He would find that he had to keep choosing because the dead do not stop at a single door and because the living never agree on what a door is. Sometimes, in the small hours between horns, he walked to the gate and leaned his head against the wood and closed his eyes. He could feel the thrum of the world on the other side, like a heartbeat through a broad chest. He did not ask it to forgive him. The world does not. He told it instead, quietly and without drama. The names of the last dozen women and children who had come into the yard that day. He kept their names in his mouth like warm stones. He said them twice, as if the second saying could protect them from the wind. He did not know if anyone listened. That was all right. Ghost was there with him, a pale thing and a shadow both. The dead were out there. They were not done. He would not be done either until he was. He straightened, set his hand to the bars of the gate, and walked back into the life he had made. Snow fell. Fell without caring who you were. It made a little hush on every stone. It covered the old blood, and then another blood, and then dried into a crust you could crack with your boot. It covered the tracks of men and of wolves and of hollow feet. It covered the blue river and the frozen sea and the shoulder of a bear-wrapped man as he slept facing the door. It covered Winterfell and the Shadow Tower's rubble and the masts of the boats that would never go out again. It covered all that a man could imagine, and more that he could not. He breathed into it and it vanished and was replaced. He stood long enough to be part of it and then moved, because you have to. The morning did not ask his name. He gave it anyway. He kept walking because he had work until the ground itself was done holding him. He had put his hand on the hinge of a door too heavy to hang on any house. He had felt it swing, and the world had gone about its business stepping through. He would be there at the door while he could. The rest, as the old men in the hall liked to say, the gods would have to sort out if they ever remembered we were here.